November 29th, 1944. 10:57 a.m. The biggest aircraft carrier ever built starts sinking. 1,435 men go down with it, including the captain. This is the Shinano, Japan's secret weapon that became their biggest disaster. It had been in service for just 10 days, 17 hours into its first voyage. The crazy part? The submarine that sank was 1/46th its size. A tiny 1,500-ton American sub with 81 men took down Japan's 72,000-ton supercarrier. Let the story begin. May 1940, Yokosuka Naval Arsenal. The keel is laid for the third Yamato-class battleship, Shinano. If you know anything about World War II, you know that name. Yamato and Musashi, the world's most powerful battleships, displaced over 72,000 tons and carried 9 18.1-inch, 460-millimeter guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship. Shinano was meant to be their sister, the third queen of Japan's super battleship fleet. For 2 years, workers labored in complete secrecy. The entire site at Yokosuka was covered by tarps and fencing. No photographs, no public records. Even many naval officers didn't know what was being built. The third Yamato had an uncertain fate because everything changed on June 4th, 1942. Midway, Japan's catastrophic loss of 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, at the Battle of Midway shattered its naval air power. In just 6 minutes, American dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown turned Japan's pride into burning wrecks. The battleship era was over. Japan now needed carriers, fast. So they made a decision that would seal Shinano's fate, convert her into an aircraft carrier while still only 45% complete. This wasn't just any conversion. At 69,000 tons when launched in 1944, Shinano would remain the world's largest aircraft carrier until the 1960s. With a full load displacement of 71,890 tons, she was unmatched in size until the nuclear-powered USS Enterprise, 1961. Her design was unique. The original battleship armor stayed. The main deck, up to 7.5 inches thick, became the hangar deck. Above it sat a 3.75-inch armored flight deck, unlike the unarmored wooden decks of U.S. carriers. She was theoretically built to survive 20 torpedo hits, a floating fortress, an armored citadel at sea. But there was a problem, and Japan didn't even know it yet. Shinano's conversion was rushed. Poor welding, incomplete bulkheads, and missing watertight doors left her vulnerable. Her crew, barely trained, had never drilled for battle damage. When she left Yokosuka in November 1944, she was unfinished, untested, and carried no aircraft, only supplies and spare planes for the remaining fleet carriers. Shinano was meant as a support carrier, carrying about 47 operational aircraft and 120 in storage, with a crew of over 2,400. But her immense armor couldn't save her from what came next. Within days of leaving port, her hidden flaw would doom her. The ship designed to survive 20 torpedoes would sink from just 4. But there was a problem, and Japan didn't even know it yet. By 1944, Japan was losing the war. The ship was originally scheduled for completion in April 1945, but construction was expedited after the defeat at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. As the Imperial Japanese Navy anticipated that the United States would soon be able to bomb the Japanese home islands using long-range aircraft from bases in the Mariana Islands. The pressure was suffocating. The builders at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal were unable to increase the number of workers on Shinano and could not meet the new deadline of October. Even so, the desperate rush to finish as quickly as possible led to poor workmanship and incomplete systems throughout the ship. Many compartments were left unwelded, and watertight integrity tests were skipped entirely. Shinano's launch on October 8, 1944, with Captain Toshio Abe in command, was marred by what some considered an ill-omened accident. During the floating-out procedure, one of the caissons at the end of the dock, improperly ballasted with seawater, unexpectedly lifted as the water rose to harbor level. The sudden inrush of water into the graving dock pushed the carrier into the forward end, damaging the bow structure below the waterline and requiring several weeks of repairs. An omen? Maybe. But the Japanese Naval Command didn't care. They needed this ship operational now. On November 19, 1944, Vice Admiral Keiji Fukuda of the Japanese Navy Technical Department requested a delay, citing that her watertight compartment doors were still unfinished and several critical systems, including pumps and fire mains, were incomplete. But the request was denied. Read that again. The watertight doors, the most critical safety feature on any warship, weren't finished, and they ordered her to sail anyway. What do you think happened next? While Shinano was being rushed to completion 5,000 miles away at Pearl Harbor, a submarine commander named Joseph Enright was trying to save his career. He'd requested to be relieved after an unproductive patrol, writing, "I was responsible for an unproductive patrol and request to be relieved by an officer who can perform more satisfactorily. Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of the U.S. Pacific Submarine Force, granted the request and reassigned Enright to administrative duties ashore." For 6 long months, Enright watched other submarine commanders rack up kills while he pushed papers. But in September 1944, he asked for another chance to redeem himself and received what Lockwood called a rare second chance, command of the USS Archerfish, SS-311. Archerfish was a Baleo-class submarine, displacing 1,526 tons on the surface and armed with 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft. She'd been on patrol since October 30th, 1944, performing mostly lifeguard duty, rescuing downed B-29 Superfortress crews returning from bombing missions over Japan. It wasn't exactly a glory assignment, but it kept her close to Japan's coastal waters, exactly where fate needed her to be. On November 11, 1944, scheduled B-29 airstrikes against Tokyo were canceled, and Archerfish, freed from her life-saving duties, was ordered to patrol the approaches to Tokyo Bay. Now, this is where fate steps in, because at the very same time Archerfish was prowling off Tokyo, Shinano was being ordered to make a desperate nighttime dash. She departed Yokosuka Naval Base in the evening of November 28, 1944, carrying about 2,500 men aboard, along with 6 Shinyo suicide motorboats and 50 Yokosuka MXY, 7 Oka rocket-powered special attack aircraft. Escorted by 3 destroyers, Isokaze, Yukikaze, and Hamikaze, she set out on her maiden voyage. The plan was simple but risky. Sail 340 miles southwest to Kure Naval Base under cover of darkness, complete her fitting out, and prepare for combat operations. But what they didn't know was that this would be the beginning of their nightmare. Shortly before 9 p.m. on November 28, 1944, Archerfish's radar picked up a ship about 12 miles away. Enright initially thought it was an unescorted tanker, but an hour later, lookouts identified something shocking. It was a massive aircraft carrier accompanied by 3 destroyer escorts. Enright couldn't believe it. U.S. naval intelligence was confident it had accounted for all of Japan's surviving carriers. There wasn't supposed to be any carrier in these waters, but there she was, the biggest target Enright had ever seen. And she was steaming southwest at 20 knots. Archerfish began a 6-hour surface pursuit of the carrier, tracking her movements while planning a submerged attack. For 6 agonizing hours, Enright pushed his submarine to top speed, trying to maneuver into position ahead of the massive vessel for the perfect shot. The moon was setting, and dawn was only hours away. If he didn't attack soon, the rising sun would expose him, and his chance would be gone forever. Meanwhile, on Shinano's bridge, Captain Toshio Abe had detected what appeared to be American submarine radar emissions. Believing multiple submarines were lurking nearby, Abe assumed Archerfish was merely a decoy, and that the main attack would come from a wolf pack waiting ahead. So he did what any textbook-trained officer would do. He ordered evasive zigzag maneuvers. And you think that saved him? Listen to this. When Abe began his zigzag pattern, he unknowingly steered directly toward Archerfish, a submarine he could have easily outrun had he continued on a straight course. His attempts to evade instead led him straight into Enright's sights. At 2:41 a.m. on November 29th, the target turned away from Archerfish, then swung back, heading directly toward the submarine. Enright couldn't have scripted a better setup. At 3:05 a.m., Enright ordered Archerfish to dive. At 3:17 a.m., at a range of only 1,400 yards, he fired all 6 forward torpedo tubes at the carrier. He deliberately set the torpedoes to run shallow, about 10 feet, to ensure hits even if they ran deeper than intended, and to maximize the chance of capsizing the carrier by striking higher on her hull. 6 torpedoes streaked through the dark water. 4 found their mark. The first torpedo struck Shinano farthest aft. Over the next 30 seconds, 3 more warheads detonated against the massive aircraft carrier's hull, working their way forward. The explosions and instant flooding killed scores of men, many still asleep in their bunks. The torpedoes hit about 10 feet below the waterline. On the bridge and upper levels, the commander and his officers were not yet aware of how severely the ship had been damaged. Many of them had survived earlier torpedo attacks aboard other vessels and believed this one would be no different. Even as their gargantuan ship began to list, they remained optimistic. Remember, this ship was designed to survive 20 torpedo hits. 4 shouldn't have been enough. Captain Abe wasn't worried, neither were his officers. They had no idea what was happening below. The third torpedo strike was particularly disastrous, flooding the number, 3 boiler room and killing every man on watch. From there, the flooding spread as structural failures caused the 2 adjacent boiler rooms to fill as well. The watertight doors that weren't finished, they weren't holding. The pumps that were supposed to be installed in critical locations, they didn't exist. The crew were unable to contain the flooding due to serious design flaws, poor workmanship, and inexperience in damage control. Initially, those aboard the IJN Shinano underestimated the severity of the damage caused by the torpedo strikes, meaning minimal effort was made to counter-flood or seal the compartments. By the time they realized how bad it was already too late. The ship continued underway at reduced speed, but around 6 a.m., she lost power completely. Shinano was dead in the water, listing heavily to starboard and taking on thousands of tons of seawater every minute. In desperation, Captain Abe attempted to beach the ship on the nearest coast of Honshu, but she was too far from shore. The list increased, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees. At 10:18 a.m., Abe ordered the carrier, now suffering a 30-degree starboard list and on the verge of capsizing, to be abandoned. Men leaped into the cold Pacific as destroyers raced to pick up survivors. And at 10:57 a.m., 7 hours after being torpedoed, the largest aircraft carrier ever built rolled over and slipped beneath the waves. 1,435 men were killed in her sinking, including Captain Toshio Abe. Only 1,080 survived, and yet, believe it or not, this was still not the worst part. Enright stayed at periscope depth long enough to see the first 2 torpedoes hit Shinano, then ordered the submarine down to 400 feet to escape the inevitable depth charge counterattack from her escorts. While rigged for silent running, Enright and his crew heard loud breaking up noises for 47 minutes and were certain they had sent their quarry to the bottom. When Archerfish returned to Guam on December 15, 1944, Enright filed his patrol report. He even sketched the outline of the massive carrier during the attack. He knew he'd sunk something huge. But when Commander John Corbis, operations officer for the local submarine command, reviewed the report, he shocked Enright by saying, "I'm sorry, Joe, but Navy intelligence won't support your claim that you sank a carrier. They're saying there wasn't any carrier in Tokyo Bay, so how could you have sunk one? Will you settle for a cruiser?" Think about that. Japanese secrecy surrounding Shinano had been so airtight that the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence didn't even know the ship existed. They initially credited Enright with sinking a heavy cruiser, later revising it to a 28,000-ton carrier based on his sketches and attack data. It wasn't until after the war that the truth finally came out. Archerfish had sunk Shinano, the largest aircraft carrier ever built at the time, originally laid down as the third Yamato-class battleship, and later converted into a 72,000-ton supercarrier after the Battle of Midway. Shinano remains the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine. To this day, no submarine, before or since, has ever sent anything larger to the bottom. Archerfish received the Presidential Unit Citation, and Enright was awarded the Navy Cross. The man who'd once been demoted for incompetence had just made history. But for Japan, the humiliation was complete. The news of Shinano's sinking was immediately classified, and the survivors were quarantined for months to prevent word from leaking out. Think about that. Japan's military leadership was so terrified of the psychological impact that they imprisoned their own survivors. Men who had watched 1,435 shipmates die, who had spent hours in freezing water waiting for rescue, were forbidden even to tell their families what had happened. The Japanese public wasn't told. The emperor himself wasn't given the full story. The survivors were quietly sent to Mitsukijima until January, ensuring the loss of Shinano remained one of Japan's most closely guarded wartime secrets. Why such secrecy? Because admitting that their newest, largest, and most advanced carrier, a ship commissioned only 10 days earlier, had been sunk by a single American submarine before she'd even launched an aircraft would have shattered what little morale Japan had left. After the war, the U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan analyzed the sinking and found that Shinano had been doomed by her own design flaws. The torpedoes from USS Archerfish struck vulnerable seams between bulkheads, where rushed wartime construction had left incomplete watertight doors, missing pumps and weak joints. The result was a perfect storm of failure. In August 1945, Commander Enright visited Dock No. 6 at the Yokosuka Naval Shipyard, the very place where Shinano had been built. A month later, on September 2, 1945, Enright and his crew stood in Tokyo Bay aboard Archerfish as witnesses to history. Their submarine was among 12 American boats honored to stand by during Japan's formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri. The submarine that had sunk Japan's greatest carrier was there to watch Japan surrender. The symmetry was almost poetic, but Shinano's story didn't end there. For decades, her location remained a mystery beneath the Pacific until surveys in the early 2000s confirmed her resting place 250 kilometers south of Nagoya, lying on her starboard side under nearly 4,000 feet of water. Her hull, still mostly intact, stands as a silent monument to Japan's desperation and the cost of wartime hubris. For Archerfish, her triumph became legend, a defining moment in submarine warfare. Commander Enright, once considered unfit for command, became the man who sank the largest warship ever destroyed by a submarine, a record that still stands today. And so, the story of Shinano isn't just about a ship that sank. It's about how secrecy, pride, and haste brought down an empire's last great hope. From the shipyard at Yokosuka to the depths of the Pacific, her fate mirrors Japan's own fall, vast, powerful, and ultimately undone from within. The Shinano was supposed to be Japan's ultimate weapon, their answer to America's power. She lasted 17 hours, 4 torpedoes, a demoted commander, a rushed construction, and a captain who made the worst decision of his life. Japan's pride became their biggest embarrassment in less than a day. But the Shinano wasn't the only Japanese fortress that fell faster than anyone expected. Want to see what happened when 100,000 Japanese troops got trapped at Rabaul? Check out the video on your screen.